1st, 2009, the host of this program, Phillip Pignatelli, passed away. My name is Jason Recevuto. Over the course of 5 years, I was the director of Life, Love, and Philosophy. Phil and I met through a brief conversation about a program he wanted to put together to help people understand what the great thinkers had to say regarding a wide range of topics. At first, he wanted to do about 10 episodes or so, but at the time of his passing, we had completed 159 episodes. Phil is a great teacher, philosopher, and friend. Knowing him affected the quality of your life. Talking to him made me become a more critical thinker, reader, and thirst for knowledge. This episode of Life, Love, and Philosophy serves as a look back at some of the topics Phil covered and some of the people whose lives he had touched.
I've done programs on individual famous thinkers such as Plato, Freud, Confucius, Thoreau, Emerson, Benjamin Franklin, Montaigne, Gandhi, and others. I've also done programs on specific themes such as love, human nature, life, wisdom, loneliness, solitude, sex, friendship, and values, as well as other themes. I've also done interviews with educators, artists, and authors, and also people from other walks of life. Today, I'd like to zero in on a variety of very insightful quotations from famous thinkers in philosophy, literature, and religion.
Phil Pignatelli is an inspiration to me because he practiced on a daily basis discernment. He taught us all to question everything. He thought critically, and he encouraged independent thinking for his students and his viewers. I think what I really loved about him is that he not only went to the classics to help him in his own life, but he shared all of the wisdom that he learned with everyone else. And of course, as a writing teacher, I'm really inspired, and I have my cards here, with the fact that he taught us how, when you find a phrase by a writer that you really enjoy or that strikes you, to write it down. And then, of course, Phil went beyond that with his TV program and teaching his students. I think what I learned most from Phil was by watching him interact with different people. I felt that he respected everyone, and he was really open-minded. And we've had many conversations. And I think what I'll always remember with him is this wonderful phrase that he gave to me once. It actually happened on a program we did together. It's called happiness stealers. We were talking about how important it is to have joy in life and to hold on to it, and how sometimes somebody might come along and try to take that light away. And so Phil came up with that phrase, happiness stealers, and I always think of that if I'm confronted with someone who's doing that to me. You pointed, some of those people are really, you talked about, which is the best phrase that has given me so much food for thought, happiness stealers.
Yes.
You have to deal with them.
Yeah, and try to have compassion for them.
Exactly.
I don't always succeed, by the way, in having compassion for happiness stealers.
It's so true.
But it is true that one of the unfortunate aspects of life is that none of us can avoid having to deal with happiness stealers.
We can't.
That, you know, I divide people basically into two groups, happiness givers and happiness stealers. It's probably true that maybe all of us do a little of both. I hope not, but I think I like to think I'm not a happiness stealer. Maybe at times unintentionally I've done that. I hope not. But the point is that I think the way the human race is really divided is this, that many people have the intention, at least, of being happiness givers. And
right.
More than a few people don't even have that intention of being happiness givers. And I think one of the reasons we should have compassion for the happiness stealers is, I believe, like Plato and Spinoza and so many of the great thinkers, that when we hurt other people, we hurt ourselves.
Absolutely.
So many of the great thinkers have said that. One of the fascinating things to me about philosophy is that I went to a Catholic school, Catholic universities also, and of course we learned a lot about Jesus. At that time I didn't know much about Buddha. As you know, I now like Buddha a lot, and I often
Definitely.
quote him. But one of the things I was astonished at when I began reading a lot of philosophy is how many philosophers, even atheists, believe that when we do good in the world, we're helping ourselves, and when we do evil, we are hurting ourselves.
Definitely.
That if I try to hurt you, I'm hurting me. That what goes around comes around. The great
Exactly.
philosophers, in one way or another, almost all of them have said that. What goes around comes around.
And even that example of when you prepare your show, how it helps you. It's when you give to people and you help them out, it really brings you such joy.
Oh, I think so.
Like on a cellular level almost. Because you just feel good and you're like, I feel good, I helped this person out. And it
I
really
think when we feel we are doing good in the world, whether we are or not, but if we feel we are, if we have the intention,
exactly.
It's got to make us
Because we
feel
are
better.
imperfect and we can
Sure.
only try our best.
Exactly.
One of the great things about life is that you never know from day to day when you will meet somebody or experience some event that will have a profound impact on your life. About 3 years ago, I had the honor and privilege of meeting a very special man, Phil Pignatelli. As many of you may know, Phil had a regular show on CTV entitled Life, Love, and Philosophy. And the show was designed to help people improve the quality of their thinking and their lives. And I think that show basically categorized what Phil was all about. He was a very unique and special individual, and those of us who knew him well knew that his big desire and his big quest was to just kind of go out of his way to help people. And he did that through his teachings, and he did that through his TV show. And those of us who met him and knew him were deeply beneficial of that experience. I remember that when we met about 3 years ago, we bonded kind of instantly. And that happens sometimes with people. You don't know for what reason, but all of a sudden there's a connection. And we connected very quickly. And in our first meeting, where we were just kind of chatting about things, we found that we had a common hero in M. Scott Peck. And some of you may know M. Scott Peck. M. Scott Peck was a psychiatrist, and he wrote a number of books, but the book he's most remembered for is a book called The Road Less Traveled, which was on the New York Times bestseller list for something like 652 consecutive weeks. But anyway, at that meeting, we decided that we needed to do a show together. And we decided to do a show around the basic philosophy of M. Scott Peck. And what we decided to do was he would appear on my show as a guest and I would appear on his show as a guest. And that's kind of how things kind of worked out. But we had met, we had outlined the show about Peck and what we were going to do, and we were scheduled to tape the show at 10 a.m. here at CTV. And at 3 a.m. that morning, M. Scott Peck passed away, which kind of blew us away that we were just scheduled to do a show about him. And that was kind of a profound moment, and we used that as a segue to kind of get into Peck and his great work. So, I mean, that's kind of how things happen with Phil. He was able to kind of capture and stimulate and act as a catalyst for thousands and thousands of people. And a void has been created by his absence. And I deep down think that God just needed another philosopher up in heaven and picked Phil. And he was a very special person, and those of us who knew him will miss him, but his spirit will be kept alive in all of us that did know him.
That I mentioned M. Scott Peck before, and I know that we both very much like his book, The Road Less Traveled.
Yes.
And when you interviewed me recently, I picked up on something you said that I appreciated very much. You said you didn't like people referring to The Road Less Traveled by M. Scott Peck as a self-help book. And I agree with you. And when I was on your program, I couldn't think of a better description, but now I have. And let me throw this at you. It seems to me that Peck's book, again, The Road Less Traveled, which I highly recommend to to the views, is a wisdom book and should be put in that category. Any comments on that?
Well, I think that's a great label to place on that book, because it is a wisdom book. I mean, I know when I read it, and I've read it many different times, and many different areas kind of stick out of my mind, but it is wisdom.
Yeah.
I mean, and your interest in philosophy is kind of a quest for wisdom, greater understanding, and I think that's a great label. I like that.
You recall the very first sentence in his book is, "Life is difficult."
Oh, I mean, that's...
Do you want to expand on that?
How much time do we have? I mean, that kind of sums up life. Life is difficult. I remember...
Excuse me, I admired his candor in opening his book with that line, because that could turn off a lot of people. Some people might have said, well, I'm not going to read any further. This guy's saying life is difficult. I don't want to hear that.
Well, I remember Les Brown. I don't know if you've ever heard of Les Brown, and he's a writer and a speaker, and he has a quote similar to that. He says that life is hard. Easy is not an option.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned to you before, when we work to make things easier for people, we don't help them. I mean, granted, when you have little children, yes, but when we are in a position of responsibility, when we are responsible for helping people grow and develop, we have to be able to give them situations and challenges where they're going to have difficulty, but in the process of overcoming that difficulty, it makes them stronger.
I mentioned to you before we went on camera that it seems to me that one of the most difficult aspects of being a parent is knowing how much to try to smooth the way for one's children, because I think it's natural, it's probably an instinct in parents to try to make life as easy as possible for their children. But it seems to me, and again, I don't have the solution to this problem by any means, but it seems to me if one tries to go too far in smoothing the way for one's children, or one's students for that matter, that one could actually do them harm, because one isn't preparing them to meet with all the adversity one will meet with in life.
He was an extremely truthful, honest, straightforward, good conversationalist. If I had to say one thing about him that stands out in my mind, I had the best conversations of my life with Phil. We met originally running in Clove Lakes Park. We both trained for marathons, so we got a chance to run long runs together. And it's a great opportunity for conversation. And up till that point, I can't remember ever having the kind of conversations that we had together. I was in my mid-40s or so. He was maybe 40 or going on 40. And we'd have these long conversations, sensible, not gossip, but talking about ideas and emotions and things like that. And that's what impressed me most about Phil.
Is there such a thing as a talent for conversation? We speak of people having a talent for music, for writing, for sports. Well, is there such a thing as a talent for conversation? And if there is it something most of us, if not all of us, can learn? And finally, is conversation the highest form of meaningful communication between people? Some societies in history have regarded good conversation as an art form. Historian Will Durant tells us that in ancient Athens, informed and intelligent conversation was considered to be the highest sport of civilization. What have the great thinkers in psychology, philosophy, religion, and literature said about good conversation? Well, let me give you a sampling of some of their thoughts. Henry David Thoreau talked about conversation and said this: man's noblest gift to man is his sincerity. Will Durant, whom I alluded to a little while ago, the historian Will Durant, talked about the elements of good conversation. And here is a quote from him: that is the happiest conversation,
where there is no competition, no vanity, but rather a calm, quiet exchange of ideas.
I also think most of all, he lived a life of gratitude. He always said thank you to everyone. He ended his programs on a note of gratitude. And I am going to miss him so, so very much. And I feel absolutely honored to have had Phil affect the quality, not just of my day, but of my life.
And here's what Thoreau says about the idea of being awake, and I'm quoting him. "To be awake is to be alive. I have never yet met the man who is quite awake. How could I have looked him in the face?" Biographer Walter Harding, who has written what many consider to be the definitive biography of Thoreau, has said that Walden is above all a guidebook to the higher life. Thoreau addressed himself in his book to the question of what is the highest art? Is painting, sculpture, teaching, practicing law the highest of arts? Thoreau said no. Here is his response, and I'm quoting him. "To affect the quality of the day, that is the highest of arts." Ralph Waldo Emerson, the very famous lecturer and writer and poet, who also lived in Concord, Massachusetts, and perhaps knew Thoreau better than anybody else, said this about him. He said Thoreau was interested in cultivating the art of living well. Thoreau had this comment on philosophers. He said this: "To be a philosopher is to solve some of the problems of life, not only theoretically, but practically."
He wasn't afraid of talking about uncomfortable subjects, subjects that are unpopular because they're uncomfortable. And he attacked these subjects and thought they should be brought out, put on the table and discussed, and people could learn from these things. One of the examples that stand out in my mind about attacking uncomfortable, unpopular situations is Phil did a long series on Emerson. I think he did 12 or 13 episodes initially, and during that period of time, we were meeting regularly and having our conversations, and I like to think that I contributed to some of his shows in that we read the same materials and discussed it back and forth. Anyway, in dealing with Emerson, the one thing that stands out is Emerson's essay on self-reliance. I had read it years ago, and when Phil brought it up, he said, "Why don't you reread it again and we'll talk about it?" And I did. And I saw what his point was. It's an unpopular essay. It's been neglected because people don't want to talk about things like conformism and consistency. They become almost desirable traits. Stay the line, become one of the boys. All of these things have to be addressed. And we saw a population, or he did mostly, and I agree with him, that our young people in particular, conformism was a big thing. To go along was a big thing. Whereas Emerson clearly pointed out it was cowardly to be a conformist. And the same thing with consistency. Emerson had the most popular a saying on consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds or weak minds, whatever it might have been. But, at that time, when politicians would change their opinion about something, they were called flip-floppers, whereas Emerson said consistency is a weakness. You have to go with the best ideas you have today, even if they totally disagree with what you thought yesterday.
I think, alluding to what you just said, what Emerson is telling us, among other things, is that if we are reflective people, our thinking will evolve. That if we still think all the same thoughts at age 50 that we did at age 20, well, there must be something wrong with us, and we haven't changed our minds about certain things.
Yeah.
And he does point out, as you did, that some people fear
to perhaps tell their friends or acquaintances who they've known for many years that they have changed their mind about something. Again, maybe thinking they'll be regarded as a flip-flopper or what have you. Let's go back to that quotation, which I also like. Again, whoso would be a man must be a nonconformist. It's the most memorable quotation to me from the entire essay, which runs about 15 to 20 pages for those who haven't read it. Why do you think many people fear to be nonconformists?
Well, there's tremendous peer pressure when we talk to young people. There are powerful examples that they feel necessary to follow.
Gandhi was against labeling people in terms of religious affiliation. Gandhi said that God does not ask what we label ourselves, whether it be Christian, Jew, Muslim, or Hindu, but rather God asks us how we behave, and that's the kind of interest God has in us. God's interested in our behavior, according to Gandhi, and not so much in our religious beliefs. Do you agree with Gandhi that religion and morality are synonymous? For example, is the most religious Christian, Jew, Muslim, Hindu, the most decent, fair, kind Christian, Jew, Muslim, or Hindu, regardless of whether they believe in much of the dogma of their religions? Let me give an example concerning a Christian teacher, actually two Christian teachers. And after I give the example, I will ask you to determine who is living a life more in conformity with Christ's teachings. The first Christian teacher goes to church every Sunday and believes all the dogma of the church. But this particular teacher is not especially interested in teaching. He doesn't spend very much time lesson planning. And also, he goes along passively with an educational system that's not working. And one of the reasons he does this is he's seeking promotion. The other Christian teacher doesn't go to church regularly and questions many of the dogmas, I should say, of the church. But this latter teacher is a very conscientious teacher and speaks out against the institutional corruption in the school system, even though he knows that he will risk promotion in so doing. Now I ask you, who is acting more like Jesus Christ? What do you think? I've been addressing the question, what should be our guide in determining what's moral? In previous programs, I first discussed the possibility of using one's conscience as a guide. And in a later program, I discussed the possibility of using a holy book as a guide. While each can be useful, I attempted to show that neither proves to be a perfect guide to morality, and that it is possible to follow one's conscience or the guidelines of a holy book and still do great evil. Indeed, history bears this out. I pointed out, for example, that some slave owners, slaveholders over the centuries, and some Nazis who engaged in the systematic murder of Jews may not have had guilty consciences because of a slanted education, indoctrination, or the evil example of others. By the same token, I also pointed out that over the centuries, some people have used holy books to justify the murder of other people who did not share their religious beliefs. And also, some people have used holy books to justify treating women as being subservient to men. And also, I pointed out that there has been a propensity among people to cherry pick when they use a holy book as their moral guide. What do I mean by cherry picking? Well, some people will choose certain passages in a holy book by which to live and totally ignore other passages.
The great English novelist Charles Dickens raised the question, does anyone ever get to know anyone else very well? And in The Tale of Two Cities, perhaps his greatest book, he penned the following words: every human being is constituted to be that profound secret and mystery to every other human being. And Thoreau lamented the rareness of sincerity. It was a common lament of Thoreau's. And here is his take. He said this, and I'm quoting Thoreau: I sat at a table where were rich food and wine in abundance, but sincerity was not, and I went away hungry. Of course, another major cause of loneliness can be sorrow, serious illness, divorce, loss of a loved one. All these experiences are sad experiences, and isn't it true? Our sadness is often accompanied by a feeling of loneliness.
Thank you for joining us. And I think Phil always ends the program best by saying,
as is my custom, I'd like to end with a quotation from Henry David Thoreau. Thoreau in Walden, his masterpiece, penned the following words: to affect the quality of the day, that is the highest of arts.